By the third time Suan tugged at my sleeve, the hydrangea from beneath the second-floor corridor had already been placed into my hand. "Miss, young Master Chen is downstairs." I didn't look at her. I took the red silk-wrapped embroidered ball, my fingertips brushing against the dense gold thread embroidery on the silk, causing a slight tingling sensation in my pads. The roar of the crowd surged up from below, mingled with the smell of gunpowder from exploded firecrackers. A dense mass of heads below were all craning upward. Directly in front, a figure in a moon-white robe stood straight, a folding fan pressed against his palm, a perfectly measured, gentle smile gracing the corners of his mouth. Chen Yulang. I had watched that smile for 3 whole years, and he didn't cast it aside until the final fire burned through the bed curtains. That night, he stood in the courtyard holding his newly elevated concubine as they watched the fire, saying, "The entire Shen family has been burned clean. Just as well." Someone in the crowd below shouted, "Second Miss Shen, throw the silk ball to the left." Suan tugged at me again in a panic. "Miss, young Master Chen is, he's waiting." "I do." I flicked my wrist. The moment the silk ball left my hand, the crowd below fell into a sudden hush, as if suppressed by something. The red arc sliced through the air, passing through the firecracker confetti that drifted like scattered gold, flying 3 feet above Chen Yulang's head. The smile on his face froze instantly. His folding fan snapped shut with a clack as he whipped his head around to follow the trajectory of the ball. The embroidered ball struck the black wool curtain of the sedan chair in the far right corner. The sound of it hitting the ground was faint, but the crowd receded like an ebbing tide. Within 3 paces of the sedan, the space was swept clean. Not a single soul remained standing there. Chen Yulang's expression shifted. I didn't look at him, instead leaning against the railing to peer down. Below, the onlookers' gazes drifted from the embroidered ball toward the slit of the lifted curtain, only to recoil as if scorched. A black brocade boot stepped out from the sedan, its sole meeting the stone pavement with a sound so faint it was nearly inaudible, yet the roar of firecrackers lining the street seemed to fall silent for a fleeting heartbeat. Xiao Duo bent down to step out of the sedan chair, carrying the embroidered ball in his hand. The red silk draped between his fingers. He glanced down at it as if looking at something rather uninteresting. He was not wearing his formal headgear today, his raven hair bound only by a single jade hairpin. His complexion appeared excessively pale in the high noon light, his brow bone set low, and his eyes were light in color, looking at people as if through a layer of ice. "The Shen family," he spoke, his voice not loud, yet everyone on the street could hear him clearly. I didn't move. Suan had already knelt down, her entire body trembling. Someone in the crowd below shouted Prince Duan, and immediately, the people fell to their knees in waves. Chen Yulang did not kneel. He stood at the front of the crowd, his face flushing white and red by turns. His gaze shifted between me and Xiao Duo twice before he finally gritted his teeth and took a half-step forward. "Your Highness, this silk ball. Is it yours?" Xiao Duo tilted his head to look at him. Chen Yulang's Adam's apple bobbed. "This silk ball was originally supposed to. I asked if this silk ball belongs to you." Xiao Duo didn't look at him. His gaze had already drifted up to the balcony, landing on me. Those pale eyes looked over, neither angry nor smiling, as if he were sizing up an object he hadn't quite decided how to dispose of yet. In her previous life, during the 2nd year after Shen Qingxi married into the Chen family, Prince Duan was framed for treason by the crown prince. 7 days after being thrown into the imperial prison, he committed suicide in his cell. 3 days later, the Chen family hosted a banquet where Chen Yulang remarked to the guests that Prince Duan's fall was a blessing, as it saved them from living in constant fear. I withdrew my gaze and curtsied slightly toward the floor below. "Since the embroidered ball has fallen into your Highness's hands, it is the will of heaven." Suan looked up at me abruptly, her lips trembling as she let out a faint "me," before biting it back firmly. Xiao Duo paced a couple of steps while clutching the embroidered ball, the tips of his boots grinding a faint gray mark into the stone floor. The man beside him, a guard dressed in dark cyan short tunic attire, already had his right hand resting on the hilt of his blade, his gaze sweeping across the surroundings as if taking a head count. The second daughter of the Shen family. Xiao Duo stopped in his tracks and tilted his head to look at me. A sudden curve appeared at the corner of his mouth, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. Do you know how many people currently reside in my prince's manor? It was a bizarre question to ask. Both upstairs and downstairs fell silent. Only the remnants of firecrackers were swept across the street by the wind. The head of the Shen family, Shen Huijin, rushed out from the second-floor private room, his robe disheveled from the haste. His face was as white as paper as he hissed at me under his breath, "Minor. Get down here. Get down." I didn't look at him. I only stared at the black woolen sedan chair below and the man holding the embroidered ball beside it. "How many people are in your highness's manor?" "I will naturally find out once I marry into it." Xiao Duo looked at me for a moment. He suddenly tossed the embroidered ball aside to the guard behind him, then turned and walked toward the sedan chair. "Your Highness." Chen Yulang chased after him for 2 steps, his voice slightly strained. "Today's ball tossing is the Shen family's ceremony for choosing a son-in-law. If your Highness has no intention..." "When did this prince ever say I had no intention?" Xiao Duo stopped. He didn't look back, his tone sounding like a casual response. Chen Yulang froze in place, the folding fan slipping from his fingers and hitting the stone floor with a sharp clack. Xiao Duo had already bent down to enter the sedan chair. Before the curtain fell, the black-clad guard cupped his hands toward the upper floor and said in a flat voice, "The Prince of Duan's estate will send a matchmaker tomorrow." When Suan helped me down the stairs, her hands were trembling so violently she could barely support my elbow. The crowd below had dispersed and gathered again, their gazes fixed on me as if looking at someone whose death warrant had already been signed on the guillotine. Chen Yulang remained standing where he was, his folding fan still lying on the ground, staring at me with a livid expression as I approached. "Second Miss Shen." He blocked the foot of the stairs, his voice pressed extremely low, his throat sounding as if it were obstructed by something. "Do you have any idea what kind of man the Prince of Duan is?" "Young Master Chen." I stopped and finally looked him directly in the eye. He looked much younger than he did in my memory that night when he held his high-ranking concubine while watching the fire. His features hadn't yet acquired that slick, greasy sheen bred by power. At this moment, his eyes were filled with utter disbelief and a barely suppressed fury. Young Master Chen heard it just now. I didn't pick up the embroidered ball. His Highness Prince Duan did. He pressed half a step forward. Suan shrank back in fear, but I stood my ground. 3 months ago, he cut himself off mid-sentence, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. That gentle facade finally cracked, revealing the hidden ferocity beneath. "You handed me a handkerchief." "A handkerchief?" I looked at him. Young Master Chen must have misremembered. "You, Minor!" Shen Huijin caught up from behind, pulling me behind him with a sharp tug. He bowed repeatedly toward Chen Yulang, hands clasped. "Young Master Chen, please forgive us. Today's incident was purely an accident." "Once Lord Shen." Chen Yulang stared at me, enunciating every word. "Prince Duan is 24 this year, yet his estate has neither a primary consort nor a side consort. Do you know why?" Shen Huijin's hand trembled within his sleeve. "Because his last fiancée died the night before she was to be carried into the prince's manor." As Chen Yulang spoke, his lips suddenly curled into a fleeting smirk, as if he had finally reclaimed some ground. "Is the second Miss Shen so brilliant that she was actually unaware of this?" Shen Huijin stopped me from responding and bowed again to Chen Yulang. "Master Chen, say no more. Let us discuss this matter later. There is no need for further discussion." I stepped around Shen Huijin and walked toward the door. The black woolen sedan chair from earlier had already vanished at the end of the long street, leaving only the red paper scraps scattered across the ground to be swirled into the corners by the wind. Suan hurried to catch up, her voice trembling with a hint of tears. "Miss, is what Master Chen said true?" "About the Prince Duan's manor. What he said is true." Suan stumbled. I caught her and continued walking out. Countless pairs of eyes peered from the shop fronts lining the long street, from the gaps in door panels, from behind cloth curtains, and from beneath tea stalls. Their gazes clung to my back, heavy as a layer of sodden cotton. "Is that young lady still Suan?" She fell silent. I looked down at my palm. The pads of my fingers still bore the marks left by the gold embroidery from moments ago, a faint red line, like a razor-thin scar. Before the fires of my past life swept through, I had stood by the well in the Chen family's backyard, staring down at the face in the water, so haggard I barely recognized it. I was thinking, what if the embroidered ball hadn't fallen into Chen Yulang's arms that day? The well water rippled, and I was back. "Go back and prepare for the wedding," I said. Suan froze for a moment, her voice still trembling as she caught up. "Miss, what? What should I prepare?" "A bright red wedding dress." The wind swept through the long street, and I raised my hand to tuck back the stray hairs at my temples. Behind me, Chen Yulang's voice chased me from the entrance of the Shen residence, broken and scattered by the wind. I didn't listen to a single word. The bridal sedan chair came to a rest in front of the Prince Duan's manor. The body of the sedan sank slightly, but no one outside handed in the red silk ribbon. Suan's voice squeezed through the gap in the sedan curtains, lowered almost to a breathy whisper. "Miss, the doors are open, but there's no one here to receive us." I lifted a corner of my bridal veil to look out. Sure enough, the vermilion gates stood wide open, the stone courtyard inside swept clean. Red lanterns were hung on both sides, yet not a single soul could be seen beneath them. By right, there should have been a master of ceremonies to announce the arrival and a matchmaker to assist me, but the entrance was deserted, not even a gatekeeper was in sight. The dowry chests were set down at the foot of the steps, and the porters exchanged uneasy glances, none of them daring to step forward. "Carry me in." Outside the sedan, Suan was stunned. "Miss? Carry the dowry into the front courtyard. I will walk in myself." Suan gave a quick cry of assent and turned back to direct the porters. I bent down and stepped out of the sedan chair. My bridal veil had already been lifted and hung from my wrist, the red silk fluttering in the wind and brushing against the back of my hand. The threshold of the Prince Duan estate was significantly higher than that of an ordinary household. As I lifted my skirt to step over it, I heard the porters behind me whispering in hushed tones about how bold this bride was. The front courtyard was indeed empty. I didn't encounter even a single servant sweeping the grounds. Several old locust trees in the corner cast thick shadows, and sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, spilling patches of broken gold onto the gray brick floor and illuminating a strip of moss growing in the cracks of the stone steps. Having never been stepped upon, the moss grew remarkably even and neat. Suan followed closely, glancing anxiously from side to side, her face growing paler by the moment. "Miss, how can this prince's mansion not even quiet?" She shut her mouth. It was only on the way through the front courtyard toward the main hall that I finally saw someone. Standing at the corner of the corridor was a man dressed in dark blue short tunic martial attire. It was the very guard who had caught the embroidered ball that day. He wasn't carrying a blade, but stood leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed. Seeing me approach, he didn't bow, but merely jerked his chin toward the main hall. "His Highness is inside." The main hall doors were half ajar. I pushed them open, and sunlight poured in behind me, illuminating the dim, somber furnishings within. Xiao Duo sat in the seat of honor, one hand propping up his chin and the other holding a scroll. He didn't even lift his eyelids at the sound of the door. Second Miss Shen certainly moves fast. The sedan chair had already reached the gates. It couldn't very well be carried back. He set the book down and finally looked me in the eye. Today he wore black everyday robes with dark cloud patterns embroidered at the collar, nearly invisible unless one looked closely. Those pale eyes swept from the red silk of the bridal veil to my face, lingering for a moment. "You took off the veil?" No one came to receive the sedan, and no one handed over the red silk. For whom should I keep this bridal veil on? The corners of his mouth twitched, though it was hard to tell if it was a smile or something else. He leaned back, the chair creaking slightly under his weight. "Did the Shen family not teach you that upon entering the Prince of Duan's estate you must first kowtow?" I knelt down. But it was not the kind of kowtow he spoke of. I drew a scroll of paper from my sleeve and unfurled it across the table in front of him. The paper had been drawn in haste the night before I left. The ink was dry, but the edges were still curled and uneven. On it was a map of 3 alleys in the west of the city, marking the locations and names of 17 storefronts. Xiao Duo's gaze fell upon it, and the hand supporting his chin finally dropped away. When you threw your embroidered ball onto the roof of my sedan, you knew you would be entering the gates of the prince's manor. He stared at the words on the map. What is this? A token of loyalty. Explain yourself. 17 storefronts along the 3 alleys of the city's western district are nominally private commercial properties. However, the major shareholder behind them is surnamed Chen Chongyi, the father of Chen Yulang. He tapped his finger on one of the shops on the map, his nail leaving a faint scratch on the paper. The Minister of Rights, Chen Chongyi, has acquired 17 storefronts in the western district? More than 17. I pulled another sheet of paper from my sleeve and pressed it over the one below, revealing a blank section where the alleys extended northward. This section isn't finished yet, but Chen Yulang will purchase 7 more next spring. He's using the household registration of his maternal relatives, the Sun family, so it won't be traced back to the Chens. Xiao Duo looked at me for a long time. The light in the hall filtered through the window lattice behind him, casting half of his face in shadow while the other half was sharply defined by the sunlight. His eyes shifted twice between the scroll and my face, his thumb slowly stroking the edge of the paper. Does Shen Huijin know you painted this? No. You painted this the night before you married into the prince's manor? Yes. He folded the 2 pieces of paper and tucked them into his sleeve, his movements neither hurried nor slow, as if putting away an item he had already set his sights on. Then he stood up, walked around the long table to stand before me, coming to a halt 2 paces away. He was more than a head taller than me, and when he looked down at me, that faint, trace-like curve at the corner of his lips had vanished. The second Miss Shen. My former fiancée. I know. She died in her sedan chair the night before she was to be brought into the prince's manor. He paused for a breath. You aren't afraid? I'm afraid. He tilted his head slightly, as if waiting for me to continue. That's why I drew this. I raised my finger and pointed to the edge of the paper peeking out from his sleeve. If your highness finds this useful, I shall sleep soundly tonight. If you find it useless, and if it is useless? If it's of no use, I will paint something else tomorrow. The hall fell silent for a long while. He suddenly laughed, a short, sharp sound, as if something had rolled up from his throat only to be suppressed. He turned his back to me, took 2 steps toward the window, and stopped. The sunlight cast his shadow long across the blue brick floor. Zhou Chong, he called out toward the door. The black-clad guard pushed the door open and entered, already carrying a cup of tea in his hand. Xiao Duo did not take it, merely tilting his chin toward me. Lead her to the east garden. Assign her 2 maidservants, one for heavy labor, and one for needlework. Zhou Chong placed the tea on the small table beside me and cupped his hands in a salute, showing a fraction more courtesy than his posture under the corridor earlier. When I stood up, my knees were somewhat numb from kneeling, so I leaned against the table for a moment to steady myself. Before I could step out, Xiao Duo suddenly spoke. His voice drifted over from the window, his back turned toward me. Tomorrow, Chen Chongyi will impeach me at court for the abduction of a commoner woman. I halted my steps. Your father will most likely chime in as well. He turned his head slightly, his profile traced by a bright, white line of sunlight. When the time comes, what will you say? It doesn't matter what I say. I looked at his back. What matters is whether your highness managed to secure the deeds to those 17 shops that day. He turned around to look at me. I curtsied slightly and withdrew from the main hall. Suan, waiting under the corridor, had turned pale with anxiety. The moment she saw me, she grabbed my wrist, her fingertips icy cold. Zhou Cheng led the way, passing through 2 moon gates. The gray bricks beneath our feet narrowed, then widened again, finally coming to a stop before a small courtyard. The courtyard walls were not high, draped halfway with climbing trumpet vines in full orange bloom. There were 2 main rooms in the yard, their doors and windows freshly painted, still smelling faintly of tung oil. A maidservant in a plain blue cloth tunic knelt at the foot of the steps, her head bowed low, her shoulders trembling. Zhou Cheng pointed at her. Her name is Qingxing. She will serve you from now on. The other one, who handles needlework, will arrive later. Only after he had left did Suwen dare to speak, her voice trembling uncontrollably. Miss that. That Prince Duan. He accepted my gift. Suwen blinked, not quite understanding. I walked into the main room. The furnishings were simple, a bed, a desk, and a wardrobe. One of the wardrobe doors stood half open, revealing 2 neatly folded new quilts inside. On the windowsill sat a celadon vase holding a sprig of osmanthus. The branch had been freshly plucked, with tiny droplets of water still clinging to its stamens. Suwen, open the dowry trunks. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at my hands folded in my lap. What are you looking for, miss? The camphor wood chest at the very bottom. I paused. There is an account book inside, the Chen family's. Suwen let out a soft gasp. I didn't look at her. Outside the window, the trumpet vines atop the wall swayed in the wind. A few petals drifted down onto the gray brick ground, spreading a small patch of orange-red. I closed my eyes, and the words Chen Yulang had spoken in my past life while clutching his new concubine amidst the flames surged up from the depths of my ears, crystal clear. The entire Shen family has been burned to ashes. Just as well. I opened my eyes. Suwen was laboriously dragging that camphor wood chest in from the outer room, muttering under her breath as she moved. When did Miss hide this thing? I didn't respond. The water clock in the corner dripped faintly, 1 drop, then another. When Qingxing entered carrying the copper basin, I was just finishing the final page of the account books. The sky outside the window had just begun to brighten, and the trumpet vines rustled against the window paper in the morning breeze. Suwen had fallen asleep slumped over the edge of the table, her hand resting atop a half-finished bowl of cold porridge. Madam, a eunuch has arrived at the front, saying he is here to deliver an oral decree from the emperor. Qingxing placed the copper basin on the stand, her voice kept very low. He requests that Madam enter the palace immediately. I folded the account books and tucked them under my pillow. Suwen jolted awake, rubbing her eyes as she stood up. Miss, you're entering the palace at this hour? Help me dress. Entering the palace at the 3rd mark of the hour of Mao, 6:45 a.m., was neither too early nor too late. It was exactly when the morning court session had adjourned. The eunuch delivering the decree led the way, guiding me through 2 sets of palace gates to a side hall on the west side of Changel Hall. Someone was already kneeling inside, his figure thin and his back held rigidly straight, Shen Huijin. My father. He tilted his head to look when he heard the footsteps. His gaze bounced from the ground to my face, his lips moving slightly without making a sound. There was a faint layer of astonishment in that look, but more of it was something indefinable. It lingered on my face for a moment before shifting away. Seated at the head was Emperor Xiao Huai. In his early 30s, his features bore a 30% resemblance to Xiao Duo, though his brow and eyes were somewhat gentler. At this moment, he held a memorial in his hand, his fingertips tapping rhythmically against the paper. The second daughter of the Shen family? He spoke, his voice neither high nor low. I, Huangfu Min, your humble servant, kowtow to your majesty. Rise, the floor is cold. He set the memorial down on the desk. I have summoned you for a specific matter. This morning, an official submitted a memorial impeaching Prince Duan, alleging that he publicly snatched your embroidered ball on the main street yesterday and forced you into his manor. Is this true? I stood up. There was another person standing behind and to the side of the imperial desk, dressed in apricot yellow everyday robes with a jade belt inlaid with dazzling gemstones. Crown Prince Xiaoheng held a cup of tea, his lid gently skimming the froth, his gaze sweeping over me as if measuring my worth. Seeing that I did not answer, the emperor added, "Speak truthfully, and I shall judge fairly." In response to your majesty, His Highness Prince Duan did not force the marriage. Xiaoheng's hand, which was skimming the tea foam, paused for a brief moment. Shen Huaijin looked up at me abruptly, his body leaning forward almost instinctively. "Minor, father." I glanced at him. "I am telling the truth." I threw the silk ball with my own hands, and it landed in Prince Duan's grasp. Thus, the marriage is settled. As for the claim of a forced marriage, that is news to me as well. The hall fell silent. Xiao Huai rubbed the edge of the memorial with his thumb, his gaze lingering on my face for a long time. Xiaoheng set down his teacup and finally looked me straight in the eye. The scrutinizing look from before was gone, replaced by something else. "Minister Shen." The emperor turned his head toward Shen Huaijin. "Your daughter has spoken in your defense. Does the claim you wrote in your memorial yesterday regarding Prince Duan using his influence to seize a bride still stand?" Shen Huaijin lay prostrate on the ground, remaining silent. His back rose and fell slightly within my line of sight, his fingers gripping his cuff so tightly that his knuckles turned white. It took a long while before he squeezed a sentence out of his throat. "This old official." This old official did not witness it personally at the time, but only heard reports from the servants. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Xiaoheng laughed, a soft sound, a grand misunderstanding indeed, Lord Shen. The memorial was already submitted to the imperial study, and only today do you claim it was a misunderstanding? A layer of fine sweat broke out on Shen Huaijin's temples. I looked at his profile, remembering the night the fire broke out in my past life. When the Chen family blocked the back door of the Shen residence, this father of mine had someone deliver a letter. 6 words were written on it: "Do not rescue, take care of yourself." The handwriting had been rushed, the final stroke dragging out long, with the ink bleeding into the paper. I withdrew my gaze. "Your Majesty," I knelt down once more, "I have a few words I wish to report in private." Xiao Huai glanced at me, then at Xiaoheng, before waving his hand. "The Crown Prince may withdraw." "Minister Shen, you are dismissed as well." As Shen Huaijin retreated, he passed by my side with extremely slow steps. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but in the end, said nothing at all, keeping his head bowed as he exited the palace doors. After the side hall doors closed, Xiao Huai leaned back in his chair, resting his forehead against his hand. "Speak." I pulled the ledger from my sleeve and presented it with both hands. It was already turned to the dog-eared page, which clearly listed the cash flow of 17 shops in the west of the city over the past 3 years, stamped with the thumbprint of the Chen family's steward. The destination of every sum of silver was recorded in meticulous detail. Half of it had flowed into the Crown Prince's procurement office. Xiao Huai flipped through a couple of pages, his fingers suddenly pausing. "Where did you get this ledger?" "I am not at liberty to disclose the source," I said, keeping my head bowed. "However, Your Majesty need only have the Ministry of Revenue verify the land deed archives for the 3 alleys in the west of the city to know the truth. Since the year before last, the names on those shop deeds have changed 3 times, from Sun to Zheng and then to Li, but the steward actually collecting the rent has always been the same man, a man named Gao, a longtime servant from the inner gates of the Chen residence." Silence fell over the hall once more. Xiao Huai closed the ledger and set it on the corner of the desk, his fingers lingering on the cover. "You came to the palace today just to deliver this?" "As I am to marry into the Prince of Duan's estate, I must do my part to share His Highness's burdens." "To share the Prince of Duan's burdens." He repeated those words, his tone unreadable. "You truly aren't afraid of me at all?" "I am." "Afraid, yet you still dared to submit this?" "I was afraid that if I didn't submit it today, I wouldn't have the chance to do so tomorrow." I looked up at him. From now on, your morning courts will only see more and more memorials impeaching the Prince of Duan. Today it is the forced marriage of a commoner's daughter. Tomorrow it will be forming factions for private gain. I am merely presenting the truth to your majesty, lest you be deceived for too long and find that by the time you come to your senses, there is nothing left to investigate. Xiao Huai remained silent for a long time. The sunlight from outside the window filtered in behind him, making the covers of the ledgers on the desk feel slightly warm to the touch. I knelt on the floor, my knees pressing against the golden bricks of the hall, as a chill seeped up through my skirts. You are a clever person, he finally spoke, his voice dropping a few tones. Clever people do not necessarily live long. I am aware. You knew, yet you still came? I am the second daughter in my family, a position of little consequence. I never expected to live a long life. I kept my eyes downcast. But since I have entered the gates of the Prince of Duan's manor, I must find a way to survive. Your Highness's path to survival is my own. He gave a dismissive wave of his hand. I rose and withdrew. As the palace doors closed behind me, I heard a low chuckle from within. It was impossible to tell if it was out of satisfaction or something else entirely. Under the corridor outside the side hall, Shen Huaijin had not yet left. He stood by a pillar, the sunlight bleaching half of his face white while the other half remained buried in shadow. Seeing me emerge, he took 2 steps forward to meet me, then stopped. Manor. His voice was extremely hoarse. Just now, in the hall, father. I stopped and looked at him. Who told you to submit that memorial yesterday? He didn't answer. The corners of his mouth twitched as if he were trying to force a smile, but they only gave a stiff, involuntary jerk. Lord Chen? I asked again. He averted his gaze toward the ornamental owls atop the distant palace walls, his Adam's apple bobbing. Your mother is in poor health. Lady Chen has been visiting often lately to keep her comp. I understand. I lifted my skirt and stepped down the stairs. The stone slabs had been baked by the sun for half the day, feeling slightly hot beneath my feet. Behind me, Shen Huaijin's voice chased after me, Minner, your father didn't mean to. I have gone far away. When I came out of the palace gates, I paused for a moment by the stone lions. Zhou Chong was waiting by the carriage. Seeing me emerge, he lifted the curtain. His Highness asked me to inquire of Madam whether everything went smoothly today. The account books have been submitted. I turned back to look at him before bending down to enter the carriage. The original land deeds for those 17 storefronts in the west of the city, has His Highness tracked them down yet? Zhou Chong lowered his eyes, I got it last night. I nodded and stepped into the carriage. As the carriage began to move, the wind lifted a corner of the curtain and I saw a small blue-clothed sedan chair parked at the base of the palace wall. The curtain was raised, and Chen Yulang sat inside, gazing in this direction. From across half the street, his gaze was fixed on the carriage curtain like a nail. I let the curtain fall. The carriage jolted as it turned the street corner, and Suan reached out to steady my arm. Miss, just now, young Master Chen, has he been waiting at the palace gates this whole time? Let him wait. When Zhou Chong came to report, the trumpet creeper flowers were falling all over the ground. Madam, Lord Chen was invited to the Court of Judicial Review immediately after the morning session today. Suan was combing my hair. The teeth of the comb paused for a beat, snapping 2 strands of hair. I gripped her wrist, I understand. Zhou Chong didn't leave. Standing by the door, he added, His Highness said that Chinchongi is stubbornly refusing to confess inside, claiming those shops were sold off long ago and that he knows nothing. What about Manager Gao from the ledgers? He's being held in the rear quarters of the Court of Judicial Review. He hasn't been brought to trial yet. Bring him in for questioning. I tilted my head toward Suan. And bring me that silver hairpin. Suan froze for a moment before fishing the plain silver hairpin out from the bottom of the jewelry box. The body of the pin was polished smooth without any ornamentation, save for a tiny character 4 Gao engraved at the tip. In my past life, there was an old steward in Chen Yulang's backyard surnamed Gao, who had managed the Chen estate's accounts for 20 years. On the night Chen Yulang took a new concubine, the old steward had fallen drunk by the well, muttering the same sentence over and over, the Sun woman's household registration. Her name was changed 3 times. Did she really think the people above wouldn't know? I handed the hairpin over. Grind down the character at the tip and have someone deliver it to Steward Gao. He will recognize this pin. He'll know what to do. Zhou Chong took the hairpin and studied it for a moment. Without asking a single question, he tucked it into his robe and turned to leave. Su Wen then spoke in a low voice, "Miss, that manager Gao. He will talk." Early on the morning of the 3rd day, the confession from the Court of Judicial Review was delivered to the Emperor. Manager Gao had signed and pressed his thumbprint, confessing in full detail the process by which the 17 storefronts were transferred from the Sun family to the Zhang family, and then from the Zhang family to the Li family. Every name change had passed through Chen Chongyi's hands, accompanied by the ledger of silver sent to the Crown Prince's Eastern Palace Procurement Department. I stood outside the study of the Prince of Duan's estate, waiting for news. When Xiao Duo emerged, he held a transcript of that confession in his hand, the paper appearing slightly yellow under the sunlight. "You were certain Gao Guanshi would bite?" "His grandson is an apprentice at the pawn shop in the south of the city. Lord Chen visited that pawn shop in person last month." Xiao Duo glanced at me, folded the confession, and tucked it into his sleeve. "You seem to know everything." "I just happen to know." He didn't press further. He turned and took 2 steps toward the courtyard before stopping again. "Word came from the Crown Prince's side this morning, inviting this prince to a banquet at the Eastern Palace tomorrow. Does your highness wish to go?" "I must go, whether I wish to or not." He tilted his head, his pale eyes narrowing slightly against the glare of the sunlight. "If I do not go, tomorrow's memorial to the throne won't be about Chen Chongyi buying shops. It will be about Xiao Duo's defiance of imperial orders." "Then your highness should simply go." "You're telling me to just go?" "No matter what the Crown Prince says at the Eastern Palace banquet, your highness should agree to it all. Do not refute a single word." I looked at his back. "Once you have finished agreeing, your highness need only leave the transcript of Manager Gao's confession on the table." He turned around and stared at me for a long while. "And then?" "And then, your highness comes back and waits." He suddenly let out a short laugh, as if it were squeezed from his nostrils. "Second Miss Shen. Huangfu Min," I corrected him. "Huangfu Min," he repeated, as if testing the weight of those words on the tip of his tongue. "You had me leave the confession on the Eastern Palace's banquet table because you were certain the Crown Prince would hide it?" "The Crown Prince will not hide it." "Then he will. He will burn it." I met his gaze. "The ink on the transcript is freshly ground. It will catch fire instantly. By burning the confession in front of your highness, the Crown Prince is effectively admitting his guilt to you. From now on, if he ever tries to make trouble using Chen Chongyi's case, he himself will be the grasshopper tied to that very same string." Xiao Duo did not respond. The courtyard fell silent for a long while, with only the rustling sound of the trumpet vines swaying in the wind. He stood beneath the flower trellis, his dark robes hanging still, the fingers visible beneath his cuffs slowly clenching and then relaxing. "Your mother was a member of the Huangfu family," he said suddenly, a seemingly irrelevant remark. "Yes. When the Huangfu family was seized and their assets confiscated, you must have been only 3 years old." 2. He nodded, said nothing more, and turned to leave the courtyard. I stood under the veranda, watching his figure pass through the moon gate and vanish, as Su Wen gently tugged at my sleeve from behind. "Miss, the Huangfu family that His Highness just mentioned, it is all in the past." That night, as Su Wen was helping me settle in for bed, Qingxin came running in from outside, saying that news had broken from the Eastern Palace. As expected, the Crown Prince had burned the copies of the depositions during the banquet. Prince Duan had said nothing, sitting for half an hour before rising to take his leave. Suan listened, dazed by the news. Miss, is it done then? Halfway. Suan blinked, not understanding. Just as she was about to ask further, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside. Zhou Chang's voice drifted through the door panel. It was kept very low, yet every word could be heard clearly. Madam, people from the Northern Pacification Archives have arrived. They've delivered a decree, requesting Her Highness to enter the palace. I sat up straight. What decree? Last night, the Crown Prince discovered a secret letter in the Eastern Palace, claiming it was treasonous correspondence between His Highness and the frontier generals. The Emperor has already approved it. He is to be taken to the Court of Judicial Review to await trial. The copper basin in Suan's hands hit the ground with a loud clang, splashing water everywhere. I threw off the covers and got out of bed, stepping barefoot onto the wet bricks as a chill surged up from the soles of my feet. Zhou Chang's voice added another sentence from outside the door. His Highness has already been taken away. Before leaving, he asked me to pass a message to Madam. What nonsense. His Highness said, if you are afraid, you may leave tonight. I stood inside the door motionless. Suan rushed over and grabbed my arm, her knuckles turning white from the grip. Miss, what should we do? Back to the Shen family. We can't go back. That. Change my clothes. Suan was completely stunned. I bent down to pick up the copper basin from the floor and placed it back on the rack. Dig up the jar buried under the back wall of the east courtyard. Inside is the item the prince asked me to keep earlier. Zhou Chang is waiting in the front courtyard. Have him show it to the men from the Northern Administration region. What is it? The secret letter the Crown Prince copied is a fake. I lowered my head to fasten my sash, my fingers not trembling in the slightest. The real one has been in my hands since 3 months ago. Suan let out a gasp, her lips trembling as she squeezed out a single word. Miss. What are you dazing off for? I walked past her toward the exit, pausing at the doorway to glance back at her. Suan remained standing where she was, 2 lines of tears streaming down her cheeks without her even realizing it. Go dig up the jar. She finally moved, stumbling as she ran toward the backyard. I pushed open the courtyard gate, and the night wind rushed in, sending the leaves of the trumpet vines rustling and flipping, appearing ashen white under the moonlight. Zhou Chang stood waiting beneath the moon gate, his blade half unsheathed, the silver-bright steel reflecting the moonlight. Madam, the men from the Northern Pacification Office are still waiting in the front courtyard. Let them wait. I straightened my cuffs and stepped forward. Go tell the messenger, the Princess of Duan will enter the palace to have an audience with the Emperor immediately. Zhou Chang sheathed his blade with a crisp clack and followed me out of the east garden. The palace gates had already been locked for the night. The eunuch who delivered the decree led me to the small side gate on the west, where he presented my tablet to gain entry. The palace lanterns lining the corridor swayed in the wind, casting my shadow long and fragmented across the ground. The Hall of Eternal Happiness was brightly lit. Xiao Huai was not asleep. He sat behind his desk reviewing memorials, with a pot of cold tea resting before him. When I entered, he looked up briefly, the vermilion brush still in his hand. Princess Consort Duan, he addressed me, his tone flat. Entering the palace at this hour, are you here on behalf of Prince Duan? Yes. You saw that secret letter as well? I did. I knelt down. I have come tonight specifically because of that letter. Xiao Huai set down the vermilion brush and leaned back against his chair. The letter states that Xiao Duo conspired with the frontier generals, agreeing to rise in rebellion on the 9th of next month. The handwriting has been verified. It is his. What do you have to say? The handwriting does indeed look like his. The hall fell silent for a moment. Xiao Huai's gaze lingered on my face for a few breaths longer, as if waiting for me to continue. However, every memorial and letter His Highness has written over the past 3 months was, in fact, ghostwritten by me. Xiao Huai's hand rested on the edge of the desk, motionless. His Highness was injured 2 months ago. An arrow pierced the web of his right hand, and he has been unable to hold a pen since. I looked up at him. If your Majesty does not believe me, you may summon the imperial physician who was on duty that day for questioning. His Highness's handwriting was indeed sharp in the past, but every memorial from the last 3 months was imitated by me, every single one in that stack on your Majesty's desk. Xiao Huai reached out, pulled a memorial from the stack at the corner of the desk, and flipped through it, then glanced back at the secret letter for comparison. The vermilion brush spun half a circle between his fingers before he set it back down. You wrote these for me to see? I simply wish for your Majesty to know, since His Highness has been unable to write for 3 months, why is this secret letter dated at the end of last month? He did not respond. The candlelight flickered, causing the corner of the secret letter on the desk to curl slightly under the glow. I spotted the dark red wax seal at the opening, cinnabar mixed with gold powder, leaving behind tiny, shimmering specks when stamped. Only the seal of the Crown Prince's Eastern Palace is made this way. In your Majesty's memorials, every single one uses ordinary cinnabar ink, I spoke again. But the seal on this letter is mixed with gold powder. In the palace, those who use this kind of ink, the Eastern Palace. Xiao Huai spoke those 2 words for me, his voice dropping half a degree. His gaze remained fixed on the letter, his thumb pressing and grinding against the seal, leaving a thin, shimmering reddish-gold smudge on his fingertip. He withdrew his hand to look at it for a moment, his lips drawn into a perfectly straight line. You came today just to tell me that this letter was forged by the Eastern Palace? It is not a forgery. He looked up at me. The letter was written by your Highness, I said, kneeling upright. 3 years ago, your Highness did indeed write a letter to your former subordinates in the frontier army. But that letter said, the frontier is cold and harsh, and the general's duties are heavy. There is no need to worry about affairs in the capital. The signature was in your Highness's own hand. After that letter was written, it was sealed and stored in a hidden compartment in the manor's study. It was never sent out. Xiao Huai tapped his finger once on the desk. However, the letter that appeared in the Eastern Palace tonight, while the handwriting is indeed your Highness's, the content has been swapped. There are few people who could have accessed your Highness's old letters. Aside from myself and Zhou Chong, there was only an old servant responsible for cleaning. That servant resigned and returned to his hometown half a month ago, having received a substantial sum of reward money. Who gave the reward? I could not find out, I lowered my head. But on the day that old servant left the capital, he met someone at a tea stall in the east of the city. The owner of the stall said the person was wearing a moon-white robe and holding a folding fan. Xiao Huai suddenly let out a laugh. It was a very soft sound, rising from deep within his throat, low and raspy, the younger one from the Chen family. I dare not make reckless conjectures. He stood up, rounded the desk, and paced to the window, where he stood for a moment. The moonlight outside illuminated the white stone courtyard before the hall, while the candlelight stretched his back into a long, slender black silhouette. The year I ascended the throne, Xiao Dua was only 7 years old. He did not turn around, his voice low. When the late emperor passed, he held my hand and told me to take good care of my younger brother. I nodded. I was only 14 when I gave that nod. I didn't respond. Over the years, the petitions impeaching him have piled up higher than the man himself. He turned to look at me. I have withheld every single one of them. Do you know why? Because His Highness never fought back. He laughed again, this time half a beat longer than before. He walked back to the desk and sat down, picking up the vermilion brush once more and pulling the secret letter from the corner of the desk toward him. I will investigate what you have said tonight. Thank you, Your Majesty. However, Xiao Duo is still sitting in the Dali Temple prison at this moment. He lifted his brush and drew a circle on the back of the secret letter. I cannot release him in the middle of the night. Make a trip for me and tell him, stay in the Dali Temple for one night. Tomorrow morning, when I hold court, someone will go to fetch him. I gave a word of acknowledgement, but as I rose and retreated toward the palace doors, he called out to me again. Huang Fu Min. I stopped. Those account books for the 17 shops, when did you start auditing them? The candlelight in the hall flickered twice. Xiao Huai sat behind the desk watching me, his vermilion brush suspended in midair, the cinnabar on its tip a heavy, deep red. Before marrying into the Prince of Duan's estate, I lowered my eyes. I had to prepare a way out for myself. He asked no further questions and simply waved his hand. I withdrew from Changle Hall. The night wind rushed toward me, filling my sleeves with a biting chill. The eunuch tasked with delivering the decree was still waiting at the side gate. Seeing me, he stepped forward to meet me, bending over to raise a lantern. Princess Consort Duan, shall we return to the manor? To the Court of Judicial Review. The eunuch froze for a moment, his lantern swaying slightly. Princess, at this hour, the Court of Judicial Review. Lead the way. He dared not ask further, raising the lantern high as he walked ahead. I followed him through the long, tedious corridor, the lantern's shadow swaying into a blur of dim yellow halos on the gray brick floor. The fire on the final night of my past life had been the same color, but tonight's wind was cool, refreshing my mind as it brushed against my face. Outside the picket gate at the back entrance of the Court of Judicial Review, Zhou Chong was indeed still waiting. Wrapped in a dark green cloak, he stood by the base of the wall. Seeing me arrive, his shoulders slumped as if in relief. Madam. Open the gate. Zhou Chong turned back and called out softly toward the door, and the barred gate was pulled open just a crack from the inside. I squeezed through sideways. The corridor of the back yamen was extremely narrow, with the walls on both sides blocking the moonlight entirely. Only the cell at the very end emitted a faint, bean-sized glow from an oil lamp. Xiao Duo sat on the ground leaning against the wall, with half a bowl of untouched rice resting by his hand. Hearing footsteps, he looked up. His pale eyes appeared even lighter in the lamplight than they did during the day, and they narrowed slightly upon seeing it was me. Scared? What are you afraid of? I squatted down to look at him through the bars. Someone is coming to pick you up tomorrow morning. He tilted his head slightly. Who? Your brother. Xiao Duo stared at me for a long while, then suddenly let out a low chuckle. The sound of his laughter bounced twice within the narrow cell before dissipating. He reached out through the gaps in the bars and grasped my wrist. His fingertips were warm, and the scar at the web of his thumb pressed against my skin. You are quite bold. If I weren't, I never would have made it through the gates of Prince Duan's manor. I didn't pull my hand away. After your highness departs tomorrow morning, it will be time for Chen Yulang to go in and take a seat. He squeezed my wrist, then released it, leaning back against the wall and closing his eyes. Huang Fu Min. After tomorrow, what do you plan to do? The moonlight shifted outside the window, a sliver leaking through the high vent of the cell and landing on the tips of his boots. To be the Princess of Duan, I stood up, brushing the dust off my knees. Didn't your highness say so yourself? Once the second daughter of the Shen family enters the gates of the Prince of Duan's manor, she must know how to kowtow. He didn't open his eyes, but the corner of his mouth curved slightly. As I turned to leave, he murmured something behind me, a phrase so faint I almost didn't catch it. But I didn't look back. The barred door shut behind me with a dull metallic thud, and the chain dropped, hitting the stone floor with a sharp clink. Zhou Chong was still waiting outside. The night wind swept across the eaves, causing the roof tiles overhead to rattle faintly. I glanced up at the sky. The moon had shifted westward, and there were still more than 4 hours until dawn. Back to the manor, I said as I boarded the carriage. As the curtain fell, Suwen's voice drifted from the corner of the carriage, carrying the nasal tone of someone who had just finished crying "Miss, Madam, after we get back. What shall we do? Prune the trumpet vines in the backyard of the East Villa, I replied, leaning against the carriage wall and closing my eyes. They've grown too thick. They're blocking the light. The carriage began to move, its wheels rumbling as they rolled over the cobblestone road. The story ends here. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.